Let's talk about container services on AWS. At present, there's two main container services. One is ECS, Elastic Container Service. The other is EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. Now, when talking ECS and EKS, it's not quite appropriate to say one versus the other. Rather, they just do things slightly differently. So don't view this chart as a shootout, but rather just some points that are interesting to note about each platform. And just as an aside, you may hear Kubernetes also written as K8S or pronounced Kates. And this is just an abbreviation of Kubernetes where 8 is replacing the Ubernet part. Why? Because there's 8 letters there. So people just write it as K, the numeral 8S. So both these are managed, highly available container platforms. That's what they do, and they do that job very well. ECS is a AWS creation that was built from the ground up to support Docker containers. EKS, on the other hand, is straight up pure Kubernetes. So if you have an existing Kubernetes landscape, it's really easy to convert over and lift and shift those containers over to EKS. Now, ECS is considered simpler and the learning curve is lower, whereas EKS is very much more feature-rich and complex, and it has a steeper learning curve. ECS behind the scenes leverages a lot of the familiar AWS services like Route 53, load balancers, and CloudWatch, whereas EKS, because it's pure Kubernetes, it has a lot of those features already built into the platform, so it handles a lot of those things internally. Now, the terminology between the two platforms is a little bit different. On ECS, collections of containers are called tasks, and those tasks come together to provide a service. On EKS, a collection of containers is called pods, and they can share resources and have better access to one another. For ECS, because it is an AWS creation, there's limited extensibility, whereas EKS, the whole library of Kubernetes add-ons is available to us, and we can just add them as if we were running Kubernetes on-premise. Now for ECS, there's two launch types that we can use. One is EC2, the other is Fargate. Now for EC2, we have manual control over how we build out the fleet to support our containers. Fargate, on the other hand, takes care of all this for us and automates that. The control plane of ECS asks Fargate for resources, and then Fargate goes out and provisions the required resources. For the EC2 launch type, you're responsible for the care and feeding of that EC2 pool. Fargate, on the other hand, because it's completely automated, it provisions, it scales out and scales in compute as it's needed. On an EC2, optimizing that cluster is 100% your responsibility, whereas Fargate handles that for you. Now, of course, there's a trade-off here with this automation. If you need very granular control over your infrastructure, then you might want to go with EC2. Otherwise, if you don't really care and you don't want to be hassled by trying to manage your pool, Fargate's probably a better option.